Resident Evil 4 Remake is a 7 out of 10 for me, and that says more about my taste than the game's actual quality. This will be a time capsule of my first experience with a game that I can see that is clearly excellent, but never fully bonded with. Maybe that changes, grows on me, but I will firstly state that I'm not going to fake a stronger connection than I actually had on that first run, as that would be disingenuous and unfair to you. I also didn't come into this game fresh, as my best friend had been on me for the last 8 years to play Resident Evil 4 across various different platforms that it's on, and none of their early attempts made me love it. However, on my recently drunk night, I bought the bundle, and eventually I decided I didn't make that purchase worth it, and I finally sat down with this remake. So by the time I actually got here, I wasn't really playing the game. I was finally colliding with years of hype, pressure, and expectation. And to the game's credit, I get it. I understand why this thing is beloved. I understand why people love Leon, the merchant. He's memorable. I remember why the set pieces stuck, why this remake gets treated like a modern day classic. And as for those to be aware, I played it on the PlayStation 5 with a 1440p monitor and spent most of my time leaning towards the high frame rate setup, but I did experiment with the ray tracing, the HDR, and hair strands, but I usually prefer performance over straight visual fidelity, and technically I don't really have much to complain about. It feels polished, stable, and it's obviously built with a lot of care and love. But where the disconnect for me starts is the story and the tone. I followed it through, I understood it, I just don't connect with it much. The B-movie action energy, the one-liners, the melodrama, the big spectacle of it all.
And I think that I just grew out of that style, or it just doesn't work for me like it does for others.
I don't hate it, it just doesn't do much for me anymore. If anything, Leon fits that too, and I don't dislike him, I just never got especially attached to him. He felt more like an early 2000s action lead dropped into a polished horror shooter than a character, so I wasn't really deeply invested, and to be frank, I played Mercenaries before the story, so in my head, Leon canonically wears sporty shades throughout the entirety of RE4, and somehow that to me felt more honest than pretending I got deeply attached to the narrative version. Although with all that said, there is stuff here that worked for me. The pistol feels great, crunchy, satisfying, reliable. The shotgun is exactly what I want it to be. It hits hard, clear space, and almost never feels too bad to use. The rifle, though, any of them to be honest, never really clicked for me in the same way. They felt lighter and kind of awkward, more awkward than I expected to be honest. So I always leaned into my closer range comfort picks, and that probably says more about how I played the game overall, as I was more efficient-minded than experimentation-minded. I wasn't trying to master every system or squeeze every possibility out of the sandbox. I was moving forward, sticking to the weapons that felt right and just clicked right, managing the resources and the pressure that comes with that, doing the side content when it felt natural, and just trying to keep a steady momentum, as that's what the story is wishing for me to feel. The biggest surprise was Ashley. I expected a notorious escort character who, with one of the most notorious things I was aware of, is that she has a reputation, especially in the original. Although she has improved, there is a big group that expresses that she is still frustrating. So I went in expecting annoyance, and instead of being annoyed, she was actually one of my biggest pleasant surprises. Got someone far more manageable than I was prepared for. The only times I ever really lost her was when I overextended or deliberately tested the game's limits. And for most of the playthrough, she felt responsive, readable, and much less irritating than her reputation had preceded. The escort system also asks you to stay aware of her without making her feeling like dead weight. It clicked more often than it didn't. She's not perfect by any means. There were still moments where she felt a little off, but overall she was a net positive. The real reason this stopped at a 7 is the gameplay rhythm and difficulty. I don't think the gameplay is bad. I don't even think it really fails. For me, the issue is that it never fully became my rhythm, and it ended up with me often trying to push myself into a groove instead of naturally falling into it. I usually start the games on standard or normal because I want that middle ground on a first run, enough challenge to stay engaged, enough breathing room to still take in the story and learn the system. That's normally the sweet spot for me. Here it never landed quite right. I died during regular encounters, rooms caught me off guard, pressure spikes got me, resource mistakes got me. So I'm not saying I walked through the game untouched, and I'm not saying that this is the reason my complaints are stated on. My basis is because of the bosses. I didn't die to a single one. So my main issue is the fact that on standard, it never generated the kind of sustained boss pressure that I thought would be persisted. I wanted more resistance. I wanted that feeling of the game really asking something of me at the major peaks. But instead, several of those fights felt much lighter than I wanted for a first run. As an example, the rocket launcher is the clearest. I used it twice without fully understanding how hard it would flatten those fights. It erased Krauser's final phase and basically deleted Sadler too, and I wasn't excited about that. In some aspects, I was annoyed, and I wanted more of a final push, not really a shortcut. But to be fair, I think this is more best framed as a design preference, not me trying to correct the game because I didn't like the way it went. By the time I realized I wanted more pressure, I already felt too far in to restart. So the game's issue became less that it was wrong and more that I picked the wrong first run difficulty for the experience that I wanted, which would explain why some sections landed differently for me than the others. The village, solid. The castle is probably the one I more tolerated than actually loved going through it. And yet the island was a surprise that I actually really liked. It felt like the village pushed into a louder, uglier, more aggressive version of itself, and that worked for me better than I thought it would. My pettiest complaint might honestly be the boat and some of the traversal around it. It's very minor, but it kept pulling at my patience more than it probably should. Mercenaries also shaped this whole experience more than I expected. I usually used it as a warm-up before going back to the main campaign, which is funny in hindsight because bonus content somehow became part of my routine before the main story. But I think that says something important. I wasn't just casually bouncing off the combat. I was actively trying to meet the game halfway. I was trying to train myself into its rhythm, and that's part of why my final take is harsher. I don't think I was bad at it. I think I was competent at a game I never fully loved, which is why it often felt like something I was executing rather than something I was deeply immersed in. That's also why Resident Evil 7 clicked harder for me. It gave me atmosphere, puzzle logic, and a tighter, oppressive loop, although it does have its own flaws and issues. In Resident Evil 4, it gave me momentum, escalation, and action horror showmanship, but I think I prefer the first lane more than the second, which it doesn't make it any worse, it just explains my disconnect better than pretending that I did get it. Even smaller things following the same pattern, I appreciated the quality of life touches like the auto sort because inventory management isn't really a loop I naturally love, even though I know many people do, even my best friend. Maybe that's the kind of thing that grows on me later. I'm going to be open to that. I'm just not going to act like it already happened when it clearly hasn't. And my final feeling is not that Resident Evil 4 Remake failed me or that it was bad and it's just not that good of a game, it's overhyped, it's none of that. I can see very clearly why it became a cult classic, and I still never stopped feeling like I was trying to catch up to everyone else's connection to it. I respect the craft, the polish, and the legacy surrounding it, but at the end of the day, I respect Resident Evil 4 more than I loved it, and that is why it's landed a 7 out of 10 for me. Thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful day, a wonderful night, and bye.